Our Bible reading today comes from the Gospel of Mark, the first chapter, beginning with verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you!" And Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there. That is why I've come." And so he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. The gospel of our Lord. Today we continue our sermon series, as I mentioned at the beginning. And today we're going to talk about the spiritual disciplines. And it's all part of this series called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, based on the book by the same title by John Mark Comer. The call to unhurry. Be still and know that I am God, it says in Psalm 46. When John Mark Comer names hurry the great enemy of spiritual life, he diagnoses a sickness we scarcely recognize in ourselves. We brag about packed calendars as though they were badges of honor. We chase productivity hacks as though efficiency were holiness. But what if the very speed we prize most is what keeps us from experiencing God's presence in true and intimate ways? I recently heard about a woman who lived in the blur of back-to-back demands, and she said that she felt like she was living someone else's life, racing through her own. And then she discovered the practices of spiritual discipline, things like silence and solitude, Sabbath and simplicity and slowing. One day this woman tried an experiment. She needed to know if this could actually help the blur, so she intentionally left her phone at home for an afternoon. Now, on one level, that sounds absolutely wonderful, and on another level, at least for me, that sounds absolutely crazy and frightening. Suddenly, the world felt different, slower, more spacious, more textured. She noticed the pattern of cobblestones under her feet, the sudden laughter of children in a park, the way light fractured through a stained glass window. She realized that hurry had dulled her senses. When I think back to my earliest days as a pastor in Scottsdale, Arizona, some 42 years ago, the Phaser family immediately comes to mind. In fact, they feel less like people I once knew and more like family. Dick and Marilyn, with their two bright-eyed kids, Tina and Paul, welcomed us into their home and into their hearts just when we really needed it most. Well, 3 years after moving to Yorba Linda and recently becoming senior pastor, we were reunited with the Phaser family. They came and visited us over Thanksgiving, sitting together once again around a dinner table and sharing a meal. Dick had been more than a friend to me. Though he wasn't a pastor himself, he became a mentor in countless ways. He taught me to love swordfish and mango salsa, yes, but far more importantly, he taught me what it means to live with balance between faith and family, between service and Sabbath rest. That night, as we ate a Thanksgiving Eve meal and the laughter settled into comfortable conversation, I confessed that I hadn't taken a single day off in over a month. And before I could explain why, Dick looked me gently in the eye and asked, "Bob, are you bragging or are you complaining?" And I opened my mouth to answer, but he leaned forward and said softly but firmly, "I'm not impressed. You have a beautiful young family who needs you. You're being foolish, and you need to fix this right now. You have a beautiful wife and a beautiful family. You don't want your kids growing up wondering where their dad was or resenting the church because it stole you away from them." And even as his words stung, they were wrapped in love. And I felt Marilyn's hand on my arm and with a nod telling me that Dick knows what he's talking about. I saw Tina and Paul's curious faces wondering, how would I respond to their dad? And I looked over at Jeannie, and her expression was clear: gratitude and appreciation for Dick's words. In that moment, I realized he was right. My family was right there, right now. And they deserved more than a person who would do a half-hearted bedtime story or hurried, "I love you" as I ran out the door. They deserved my full presence. That Thanksgiving, I learned that loving God with all my heart includes loving my wife and children with every ounce of my attention. I walked away from that table resolved to treasure Sabbath, to protect margin in my schedule, and to show up not just in body but in spirit for the precious ones entrusted in my care. It's still a work in progress, some 42 years later. I'll always be grateful to Dick Fazer, who loved me enough to speak hard truth, and to Marilyn and Tina and Paul, who reminded me what truly matters around the table of grace. As people of God, we declare that we are God's by grace alone, yet we live as if we must earn favor by frantic doing. What if instead we treated grace like the free gift that it really is? What if our lives were defined not by what we accomplish, but by the depth of our receiving? The call to unhurry is the call to remember who we are and whose we are. Deeply loved children, even before we speak or act. And this moves us into the discipline of silence and solitude. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. It's from the gospel that we heard earlier this morning. Before the world stirs, before the phones buzz and the to-do list clamor for our attention, there is a sacred hour folded into the dawn, dark, hushed, pregnant with possibility. Imagine Jesus slipping from the house at that hour, sandals whispering on the dew-cooled earth, breathing the cool air as the first pale light trembles on the horizon. In that holy quiet, Jesus does not perform miracles or preach to crowds. He simply prays. In that solitary place, he leans into the voice that calls him beloved. And from the womb of silence, he draws the strength to heal, to teach, and to serve. This isn't a distant portrait on stained glass. It's the pattern of our own baptismal calling. The reality of our being a loved child by God is that God meets us not only in the grandeur of a sanctuary, but in the moments, the ordinary moments when we cease our striving and remember whose we are. The same Spirit that hovered over the chaotic waters at creation hovers over our restless hearts, inviting us into stillness. Rachel Held Evans, an author and fearless truth teller, whose days brimmed with speeches and deadlines and expectations, each morning she would steal 10 minutes in her backyard. Mug of tea in hand, laptop closed, notifications silence. She called it her wild soul time. There, with bird songs for accompaniment, she felt the fierce whisper, "You are enough." That whisper became her anchor through criticism, her compass in the storm of public life. I remember hearing about a young mother exhausted by midnight feedings and morning lessons who discovered the bathroom retreat 2 minutes behind a locked door. Knees drawn up, her eyes closed, inhaling a breath prayer, "Jesus, be near." She emerged from that bathroom not to more tasks, but to a steadied heart, a softened spirit, ready to receive her children's laughter as a gift rather than chore. We need regular reminders that our worth is not measured by output, but by grace and grace alone. And the Sabbath is not a rigid rule, but it's a loving boundary drawn around our lives so that we can remember that we belong to God. And silence and solitude are, in a sense, everyday sacraments of that grace. Small acts of trust that God's voice matters more than the world's demands. Governor John Kasich, before the trappings of office began, he started each day with 20 sacred minutes of silence. No agenda, no media, just the hush of possibility. He said those moments shaped his decisions with compassion rather than calculus, allowing him to invest in things like education and care rather than cut budgets on impulse. How do we practice silence and solitude in our daily life? Well, maybe we lock the bathroom door for 2 minutes of quiet. Or maybe we sit in our car with our scripture before the day begins. Or maybe we pace the hallways in silence, offering each breath as prayer. Now, these are not escapes, but they are spiritual refueling stations, turning our hearts to God's voice before chaos returns. These aren't lofty ideals for monastics. They're invitations for teachers and nurses and parents and pastors and engineers and students, anyone who bears the weight of life itself, to receive the same grace they pour out. To practice silence and solitude is to acknowledge that we cannot give what we haven't first received. It's to claim our identity as God's loved, and to let that identity, not our achievements, drive every word and deed. So the invitation before us today is, before the sunrise of our own schedules, find 2 minutes of true quiet. Close your eyes. Breathe the name of Christ. Listen. Let the one who formed you in love whisper, "You are mine, and you are enough." And in that unhurried space, your soul will be refilled. And the work you do thereafter will flow from abundance, not scarcity, from grace, not guilt. And the world starved for compassion will taste the difference. Barbara Brown Taylor warns, if you don't have time to sit with God, you don't have time to live. All this kind of moves us into another discipline, a discipline of Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath, it says in Mark 2, Jesus' words. Before dawn's first light, the world is hushed. No emails pinging, no errands demanding attention, no schedules clamoring to be kept. In that sacred silence, the ancient promise of Sabbath can unfold. The Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. The very word Sabbath beckons us to cease, to stop striving, to lay down the burden of performance, to remember that our worth is not found in endless doing, but in God's unbreakable love. In Genesis, we hear that on the seventh day, God rested, not from fatigue, but to a model of holy rhythm, work and rest held in divine balance. That first Sabbath was an act of abundance, a declaration that creation itself is a gift, not a project to be perfected. Imagine a mother, let's call her Maria, who for weeks felt like a runner on a never-ending race, caring for her children's meetings, meals, laundry. And one Friday evening, she decided, almost an impulse, to observe Sabbath. She turned off her phone, laid aside her to-do list, lit a single candle at her kitchen table, and she invited her children to join her in drawing pictures, reading favorite stories, listening to some music. And as they shared a simple bread and soup meal, Maria felt an unexpected lightness, and the walls of anxiety that she had been building around her heart began to soften and fall. And in the soft glow of that candle, she rediscovered what she had forgotten, that her identity rests not in her productivity, but in being God's deeply loved child. Sabbath isn't just a day off. It's a weekly foretaste of the fullness of life with Christ. It's a prophetic protest against the idol of busyness, a whispered confession that we're more than our resumes, more than our to-do lists. By slowing down, by pausing, we bear witness to a world that our whole being, body, mind, and spirit, belong to God, not to the marketplace. How can we practice that? Well, maybe we claim a 24-hour window this week when we actually let our work stop. No emails, no errands, no screen time. Let the rhythms of creation, not the urgencies of culture, set our pace. Delight in the simple pleasures of a home-cooked meal, shared without hurry, or a family walk without any specific destination. or just take time to sit and listen to some favorite music. Center your rest in worship, whether that's in community, in the quiet of your own living room, a stroll along the beach. Let praise become the heartbeat of your Sabbath. And then as we join in the song of creation, we're reminded that we're not defined by what we do, but by whose we are. And in that holy pause, we can finally whisper back to God, thank you for work and for rest, for purpose and for Sabbath, for making me more than what I do. Another important spiritual discipline is simplicity. Jesus tells us in the Gospel of Matthew, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Picture this, a mom, we'll call her Sarah, getting up before dawn. She slowly enters her spacious walk-in closet and pauses. She stares at row upon row of blouses that she never wears, boxes of toys her children had outgrown, gadgets that promised ease but just gather dust. And in that quiet moment, she remembered Jesus' warning. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Jesus' words from Matthew. Those words spoken beside a Galilean hillside were never a call to guilt, but they were an invitation to freedom and still are. As Lutheran Christians, we confess that our baptism claims us as Christ's own before we ever earn a single thing. Our true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we share and who we become in love. Sarah reached for a cardboard box and began to fill it with items she no longer needed, clothes, toys, half-read books. Each object felt like armor she was shedding, armor against scarcity, against vulnerability, against the risk of giving her heart away. Yet as the box filled, her soul felt lighter. She recalled Richard Rohr's story of a wealthy friend on his deathbed, regretting not poverty but excess, regretting missed birthdays, absent hugs, ambition that never satisfied. Rohr wrote, we were meant to move from having to being. In that soft pre-dawn light, Sarah made a choice. She would move towards being present to her children's laughter, being attentive to her spouse's quiet needs, being open to the urgencies of love that cannot be bought or sold. And so today we have the invitation into simplicity. Maybe we choose clothes that we really love, and then we let go of the rest. Notice how decision fatigue fades when your choices are fewer. Or maybe we need a commitment filter. Before agreeing to do something, we ask ourselves, will this cultivate love or justice or joy in my life or in someone else's? And if not, it may just be clutter in disguise. Perhaps we open ourselves up to a media fast. Maybe sunrise to sunset, once a week. We turn off news and social feeds. And we listen instead for the voice that says, you're enough. In the quiet aftermath of her decluttering, Sarah discovered that her home was still full of laughter, full of prayer, full of the simple treasures that can't be weighed or measured. And her heart, once burdened by things, now beat in time with the promise of Christ that our true riches are found in grace and in community and in the unhurried work of being fully present to the life God has given. Sometimes what we need is to just practice slowing down. In Isaiah 30, it says, in returning and rest, you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. Before the sun warms the day's ambition, there is this sacred whisper in the dawn air. The prophet Isaiah's words are a reminder of this, an oasis in our fever-pitched world. To return, it means to turn away from the chase. To rest is to sink into the arms of a God whose love is stronger than our striving. In that holy pause, we discover a strength that the world cannot manufacture, born not out of speed or self-reliance, but out of trust. Imagine a walk with Jesus on a dusty road from Capernaum to Nazareth. He doesn't race. Step by step, deliberately, he notices the mustard seeds. They're stubborn sprouts. He noticed the sunlight on olive leaves, the ache in a woman's eyes at Jacob's well. There's no performance in his pace, only presence. Relationships, they can't be rushed. And each encounter flows from the deep well of his unhurried heart. So how can we practice slowing? God claims us before we perform. We belong to Christ not because of our achievements, but because of God's unmerited grace. Slowing is the bodily reminder of that grace. Maybe you walk at half your pace for 5 minutes. No phone, just your feet on the earth. And feel each step as a gift. Maybe we speak less and listen more. A lesson I was reminded of on the Camino de Santiago by my wife, Jeannie, and she often reminds me that that's still a work in progress, too. Maybe we pause in conversation before replying so our soul can catch the other's heartbeat. Maybe we sit a little longer at meals, savor each bite, each breath, each person, savor them as a sacrament. It's not about efficiency. It's about attentiveness. It's the difference between eating while scrolling and eating while delighting. The difference between hearing I love you and feeling it. Before we move on to the rest of this worship service, just take one moment, a moment of silence, and listen to God's permission for you. Permission to rest, to simplify, to slow, to slip away into silence. And remember that your worth is not measured by your output, but by God's unwavering love. It's all grace, and grace alone. Amen.